Since the beginning of our sessions, we've been talking about the art and the craft. So I have been going and reading, and again somewhere I read in the craft of it that your characters, especially your main character, should have certain traits and should have certain flaws. Now, when I go back and read my material, whatever I have read, I cannot pinpoint any flaws per se. And when I started writing in a flow. So I never went according to the craft of it, that you have to know your character, so you have to know the trait of the character, what he likes, what he dislikes, what makes him angry, what makes him sad. I never thought about that. But more and more, and I think in our last conversation also, you said I need to know 4 things about my character. What makes him angry, what makes him sad, what is his joy, and what is his stress point, or something like that. So yes, traits maybe I can think of, but the flaw thing is a bit confusing for me.
Okay. So as of now, from what you have gathered, what is the general idea about it? Where do you think it is not fitting into your plans?
No, it wasn't in my plan, and I don't know how to fit it into my plan, because again that goes in the craft way, and I've never started writing the craft way.
Okay. Again, for me, like I say, storytelling is just existence, life, So every inference that I take about storytelling is from life. Now, in your experience, have you, either yourself or someone around you, used the term superficial and shallow for another person?
Many times.
Now, according to you, if you were to interpret, what was the perception of that person?
The perception of that person was maybe, I found, are you asking my perception or the person's perception?
Whoever called the other person shallow or superficial.
Maybe they don't like the way the other person thinks, but for that person he might not be shallow. He or she just might be like that.
Those are subjective. Now, if you were to base that, give that benefit of doubt to your friend or yourself as being the best judge of character, what would have been the reason behind it to use that term?
Maybe the person does not look at life or doesn't understand the depth of life, and hence we call the person shallow.
Which may be very difficult to analyze if you are just watching someone from a distance, if you have not yet known someone, which is quite possible. It happens in public gathering and all that. You come across, you notice people, and you get this instinctive feeling where you don't have a background information on the character, but you get this feeling. What is it that you see and hear that gives you that feeling about that?
Most of the times it is, if the viewpoints don't match, then we think that, why are you thinking so superficially, or what is this shallow thinking of yours?
Okay.
But I like to give the benefit of the doubt to the other person also, because maybe that other person, he or she, may not have the capacity to think.
No, we are not talking about whether that opinion is right or wrong. We are talking about, if that opinion was right, what would have been the reason for such an inference? Considering you are in a gathering, you and perhaps one of your friends are looking around, watching the crowd, and either you or the friend comments on a person. Neither of you know this person, but whatever you see or hear leads to that inference. Now, considering that inference is right, what would have been the reason? See, I'll tell you. Why people make this opinion about others is when they act shallow, you instinctively feel. Now, how do you know that this person is shallow? Now, let's say you are watching a group of people gathered around a buffet table, and there's just one plate, and there's an elder who notices a child heading towards it and rushes and picks it up. What do you feel about that person?
Selfish.
Okay. Will that shallow be the right word to put it?
Yes.
Selfish, of course, is the right word, but
Yes.
wasn't that very shallow of that person?
Yes.
Knowing, and now this very same person comes and boasts about his idealism and humanity and all that. What would you call that?
Superficial.
So these are traits, right? Now these traits of this particular character has led you and your friend and maybe couple others like you to dislike this person. So that particular trait has become a flaw for that character. So now the problem with the definition of flaw in storytelling is that, and because the craft always puts it in that way, is that a flaw should be something that should cause the downfall of a person. Okay? The character, it should cause the downfall of a character, should be detrimental. But not necessarily. A flaw is just something that gives a depth to the character.
I know it's overly rated, but Godfather is one of my favorite novels.
Okay.
When I read it, I hadn't watched the film.
Mm-hmm.
I went back to finding out the flaw of any one character that Mario Puzo wrote. So let's talk about Godfather.
First of all, let's have this base that any interpretation of another creative artist's work is an interpretation. What that artist has thought and put into his work, only he would know and he would be better able to explain. But as audiences, this is our job. This is how we interpret things and perceive it, and that's why we connect with it or not, either ways. So, I feel, if we were to take Godfather's example, this was a very powerful character. By the way, just to make a note on that, is that Mario Puzo's inspiration to write Godfather was Superman.
Really?
Yeah. And his flaw was not kryptonite, but more something else. But we'll delve into that some other time. But for now, coming back to Godfather, he was a very powerful man who spoke his mind, who could see far ahead than the people he was surrounded with, and loved his family, was respected by others. Despite all that, if such a character is supposed to have a flaw, what kind of flaw he would have? I mean, in a textbook kind of way, he's very perfect character. He seems perfect. He's wherever he is in the crime world, he's the top don. He's the Godfather, with all that, despite crime, despite even respected by the law department. So imagine the kind of characterization that might have gone into it. Now, what could be the flaw of such a person, such a near perfect person? According to me, not according to Mario Puzo, according to me, what was Godfather? he was a man who loved his family, and to make sure that his family is taken care of, he might have gotten into the crime world, and where, given his sharpness and wisdom, he climbed the stairs and became the godfather. And he came to a position of power where he could dictate terms. Now, this is probably his journey, whatever, because we see him when he's already old, but this could be the journey. And the way he treats his family and everything. And even if you look into the aspect that the last moment of his life was with the family. And every time he speaks about it, his family. So that's the one thing he represents. He's all about his family. Now, what does he do that disturbs this equation in his life? That sanctity of his family.
One deal that he is so against.
Yes. Now, if we come to that deal, why was Godfather so against it? Now, if we say that he was an idealistic man, he didn't want it to do, fair enough, that is a character trait. That is why we are rooting for that character, because there is a redeemable quality in him. Otherwise, he's a don, right? There is something good in him. So, he makes that decision. But the reason all this mess that happens in Godfather's life is not just because of that one deal. Okay? That one deal could have been the trigger point. What Godfather represents, basically, is a man who is an alien in the world he lives in. Okay? Where does he live in? He is the dawn of the crime world. In a crime world, a man is supposed to be selfish, greedy, and brutish, and should be able to kill another person before the other person can shoot him. Right? These are the simple rules of the crime world. Think about yourself, get all that you can, and there is no such thing as law. In such a world, Godfather was a man with principles, idealistic principles. He would favor friends, he would remember favors, he would support whatever he believed is right, he would go out of the way to support. He was a principled man in a crime world. Now, it is like saying a individual who is supposed to be like an air hostess with an short-tempered air hostess. In the hospitality industry, she has that flaw. Now, that short-tempered air hostess was, if she was a cop, then that could have been her trait. But in the world she was living, that was her flaw. The same way, Godfather's this idealistic approach and this principled approach, this approach of not having, feeling the need to explain himself, those are his flaws in that world, because in that world there was no one else like him. So he made them look less than him. They felt alienated. They outcasted him. They decided to get him out of their way. And that all thing led to his son being killed and so on. So the significant flaw that has created complication in a character's life is this. He was a wrong man in a wrong world.
I don't think so. He was a wrong man in the wrong world, because then he wouldn't have built a regime, and he was ruling for a very long time. And I do not think that again, I'm arguing because I do not feel satiated with this answer. Because if we are talking about his traits, his characters and his flaws as a personality, they were the same when he was young. They were the same when he made a regime, reached a certain level where he became the godfather.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the beginning and his prime, his idealism was the same, which was the same during the incident, which was drugs. So yes, like you just said, that crime is wrong. I mean, you kill a person, so you kill with a gun or you kill with drugs, both is wrong. But his idealism was what, that is their work, they are doing it. But when he said no for drugs, he said it because he was thinking of the younger generation. So that wasn't his flaw, is what I feel.
Of course, it is not a flaw as a human being, but it is a flaw for a person in the crime world to think like that. See, the very example of aerostess is that, right? That particular trait of a aerostess being short-tempered is wrong for her industry, her world as an aerostess who is from an hospitality industry. But that same trait, if she had been a cop, would have been her plus point.
But what if with her same trait, because she is short-tempered, she saves the life of 600 people? So the situation is, there is a hijack situation, and she can do it only because of her trait, which is short-temperedness, which could have been a flaw otherwise, which is a flaw every time she is in the hospitality
industry. That would make for a good story, because that is all what story is all about, right? Hero overcoming his or her flaw and being a hero.
So then how does that become a flaw?
A flaw is something. A flaw is a trait that is, let's put it in a very simplest way, disrupts the equation inside you in your life. Now, if that trait of yours is self-sabotaging in whichever way, not just emotionally, physically, mentally, even socially, if it is sabotaging your progress as a character, it is your flaw. There was this movie called Kindergarten Cop. Arnold played the role, Kindergarten Cop. Now, he was a very clear-cut character, been a cop for a long time and seen crime and all that, has become dead inside in his own way, and very impatient around kids. Then there's a situation, a plot twist that leads him to become a undercover teacher in a school where he has to deal with kids. Now, in his cop's profession, him being impatient, short-tempered, aggressive, all were his traits. They pushed him forward. They helped him in his job. But in the undercover gig, whatever he was doing, that became his flaw. Because that created a barrier between him and the kids whom he was supposed to protect. And the kids couldn't trust him. And because of that distance, he couldn't make them follow his orders. So that flaw, endured with his job, is in this perspective. Now, as the story progresses, of course he bonds with these kids. The kids starts trusting him. That is where the hero has overcome that flaw. And then he is able to save them. So, the whole story about a character's journey is about him growing, right? Evolving, right? You see the same character, different situation, and the character flaw. Simply put, a flaw is a trait that is not working in your favor. No. If I am supposed to be a very diplomatic person in a certain profession and I am a sharpshooter, then that becomes my flaw. Because in that world, it is not accepted. Now, if you take me out of that world and judge me, of course it's a good trait. But where I have to exist and survive, there it is a flaw. There it works against me. So a trait that works against you is a flaw.
So coming back again to the art and craft of it,
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Mario Puzo, when he wrote Godfather, he had already jotted down these points that this will be the flaw, this will be this? Or is it become later that people went and scrutinized, critically analyzed, dissected his story and then came onto these craft laws?
See, I'll tell you what. These authors like Paulo Coelho, Richard Bach, Mario Puzo, Ernest Hemingway, I can confidently say that in my head it doesn't fit well, that they might have actually chalked out a block and figured out the hero will start here and here. They just went with the flow. They had an idea and they had the sense that it made for a good story, and they pursued the path. Now, because they were good in what they were doing and others couldn't be there, they tried to imitate it. Now, when you imitate someone, you have to observe them and know their patterns, look for something that you can practice. Now, that observation is what we are calling craft. This is what we spoke in one of our previous sessions. What is required for art to come out? The writer not standing in his own way. How does the writer stand in his own way? Self-doubt, peer pressure, and going out of the way to please an audience. You have to understand the audience. You have to cater to the audience. But you can't please them. That choice, that decision is their free will. Your job as a writer is to understand their expectations and cater to it. Whether they like it or not is their free will. Best example of art and craft in storytelling. You know that mountaineering, there's a group of hikers who would climb the mountains and all that. They all have rappel, and the first one who goes up takes all the risk. As he climbs up, he hammers the hooks and puts the rappel around it, and he reaches the top. And that path is what others follow. So the first one was an artist, others are craftsmen.